In this introductory lesson on oxygen, we will look at why oxygen may be required in an aeroplane, and we will examine the dangers that the carriage and use of oxygen brings. We will also discuss the safety precautions that are employed to reduce these dangers. In order for the body to function satisfactorily, it requires oxygen, which it extracts from oxygenated blood provided by the lungs. As altitude increases, the pressure of the air decreases, and the partial pressure of the oxygen in the air decreases proportionally. If there is insufficient oxygen entering the blood because of this reducing partial pressure, with increased altitude the body will become affected by a condition known as hypoxia. Below about 10,000 feet pressure altitude, normal breathing will provide adequate oxygen to combat hypoxia. Between 10,000 and 33,700 feet, a mixture of air and pure oxygen needs to be provided. Between 33,700 and 40,000 feet, 100% oxygen is required. And above 40,000 feet, oxygen under pressure has to be provided. Below 10,000 feet, the body is not affected very much by the slight reduction in the partial pressure of oxygen. And indeed, many people in the world live happily up to a height of 12,000 feet without suffering hypoxia. There will be some impairment of night vision as altitude increases towards 10,000 feet. Between 10,000 feet and 15,000 feet, the onset of hypoxia has more serious consequences. The heart rate increases and judgment is impaired. Short-term memory is lost at about 12,000 feet. Tasks become more difficult, and without supplementary oxygen in this altitude band, crew and passengers may become drowsy. Because the hemoglobin, which is the component of the blood which carries oxygen, is becoming deoxygenated, fingertips and lips will start to turn blue. Between 15,000 and 20,000 feet, the autonomic system cannot compensate, and the effects of hypoxia become more extreme, but are still imperceptible. Symptoms include euphoria, dizziness, headache, sleepiness, and further loss of judgment and performance. Vision may become tunneled. Above 20,000 feet, performance decreases dramatically, with disorientation, confusion, and ultimately brain damage and death. A pressurized cabin with the cabin altitude maintained below 8,000 feet will prevent the onset of hypoxia. However, crews should always remain aware of the early symptoms of hypoxia, as a slow loss of pressurization can go unnoticed until it is too late. In the event of a sudden loss of pressure at high altitude, the onset of hypoxia will be very rapid. Following sudden decompression, for instance the loss of a window, there would, depending on altitude, be only a few seconds during which the pilot would remain at a level of consciousness where he could carry out effective actions. This is known as the time of useful consciousness. It is shorter than the time before he becomes unconscious. It is worth studying this table, which shows the time of useful consciousness if a decompression were to occur. For example, During a progressive decompression, the time of useful consciousness, while engaged in moderate activity at 30,000 feet, is 45 seconds. As soon as the symptoms of hypoxia are recognized, oxygen should be used, and the aircraft descended to an altitude where atmospheric oxygen is present in sufficient quantities to meet the body's needs. The regulations governing the carriage of oxygen in aeroplanes are in EASA publication EU OPS 1, subpart K. They require that pressurized aeroplanes carry oxygen for use in case of failure of the pressurization system, and that unpressurized aeroplanes have oxygen available if they are operated above 10,000 feet. All aeroplanes above a certain weight also require oxygen for use should the cabin air become contaminated. The regulations divide the oxygen requirements into 3 groups. These are supplemental oxygen, first aid oxygen, and protective breathing equipment oxygen. Oxygen is a non-flammable, heavier-than-air gas, which supports combustion as well as life. There are a number of general safety precautions that need to be taken with and around all oxygen systems. Specific precautions for individual aircraft types are contained in the appropriate aircraft manual, and you should familiarize yourself with the safety precautions for your aircraft type. Any flammable material will burn more fiercely in the presence of oxygen than in air. Smoking is therefore banned in oxygen-rich atmospheres, and all combustible materials should be removed from the area of oxygen recharging operations. Care should be taken to avoid causing sparks. No oil or grease should be allowed to come into contact with oxygen, as there is the possibility of a severe chemical reaction and spontaneous combustion. This means that tools, protective clothing and so on must be free from oil and grease. Any moisture present in the oxygen can cause corrosion, and there is the possibility of valves freezing as the oxygen flows through them. It is therefore essential that aircraft are replenished only with oxygen approved for aviation use. Aircraft quality oxygen has particularly low moisture content. Only lubricants specified in the maintenance manuals may be used. The permitted lubricants are normally graphite-based. Graphite grease is conductive, thereby reducing the risk of sparks, and it doesn't freeze. During replenishment or maintenance of oxygen systems, the surrounding area must be adequately ventilated. Remember that oxygen is heavier than air and will fill low-lying areas such as servicing pits. That is the end of the lesson. You should now have an understanding of the cause and effects of hypoxia. Hypoxia is covered in greater detail in the Human Performance series of lessons. You should know the precautions to be taken around oxygen equipment.